Convert each of the following into a percent. So for A, B, and C, we have decimals, and we know that when we want to change a decimal to a percent, we move the decimal place 2 times to the right. So on A, I'm going to move the decimal 2 times to the right, and my percent will be 3 4/10%. I'm going to do the same thing for B. I'm going to move the decimal 2 times to the right, and I have 560%. And for C, I'm going to move the decimal 2 times to the right, and I will have 18 7/10%. Now for my next 3 problems, I have fractions, and I want to change them to percents. So I need to divide, and I can use the ice cream method to help me out. So my ice cream, the 5 goes inside, so the numerator goes in, and then the cone goes outside, so the denominator 8 will be outside. 8 does not go into 5, so I'm going to put a 0. I'm going to add a decimal, bring it up, and add a 0. 8 goes into 50 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. Subtract and get 2. I'm going to add a 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. Subtract and get 4. Add another 0, bring it down. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. Subtract and get 0. Alright, so now I have 625 thousandths. So it's a decimal. So kind of like the last problems we were doing, we're going to take that decimal and move it 2 times to the right. So I have 62.5%. Alright, so now we have 1/5. So we're going to do the same thing. So 1 goes in because it's the ice cream and it's our numerator, and 5 goes out because it's the cone and it's also our denominator. 5 does not go into 1, so I add a decimal, bring it up, add a 0. 5 goes into 10 2 times. 2 times 5 is 10, subtracting is 0. So I need to move that decimal place 2 times to the right. So when I move it, you're going to notice I move it once, and then I am going to move it a second time, and I'm going to need to add a 0. So I will have 20%. And our last problem, 2/25. So 2 goes inside, ice cream goes in the freezer, and 25 goes outside. The cone goes outside of the freezer, and 25 does not go into 2, so I put a 0. I add a decimal, bring it up, add a 0. 25 does not go into 20, so I'm going to put a 0. Add another 0. 25 goes into 200, and let's think about it being $2. I know that 4 quarters goes into $1, so if I have another 4 quarters, that would be $2, and that would be altogether 8. So I know that 8 times 25 will give me 200. Subtracting at 0. I'm going to move the decimal place 2 times to the right, so I have 8%. Mr. Peoples surveyed 150 students. He asked them to pick their favorite music genre. His results are listed below. Write each of them as a fraction, a decimal, and a percent. So I have 60 out of 150 who like pop. So that would be our fraction, but we always need to simplify. Both of these can be simplified by 30. So 60 divided by 30, or you could say 30 goes into 60 how many times, which would be 2, and then 150 divided by 30, or you can ask yourself, how many times does 30 go into 150? Well, we know that's 5 times. So our simplified fraction would be 2/5. Now we want to change that to a decimal. So I'm going to do my ice cream. 2 goes in because it's the ice cream. 5 goes out because it's the cone. 5 does not go into 2, so I put a 0. Add a decimal, bring it up, and add a 0. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract and get 0. So my decimal will be 4/10. And I'm going to write my fraction from earlier, so 2/5. And then now we want to write that as a percent. So I'm going to take my decimal and move it 2 times to the right. I notice I need to add a 0, so that will be 40%. I'm going to go ahead and erase my work for the next problem so I have room to work. So give me just a second. All right, so our next problem, we have 45 out of 150 students that like hip hop. So we've written that as a fraction, but we need to make sure that we simplify. So I'm going to simplify both of those by 15. So 45 divided by 15, or think of it as how many times does 15 go into 45, which would be 3. And then 150 divided by 15, or how many times does 15 go into 150, which would be 10. So we have 3/10. All right, so let's change that to a decimal. Well, I noticed that 10 is my denominator, and that's a place value, 3/10. So I'm going to write that as 3/10. And to make it a percent, we're going to move the decimal 2 times to the right. We'll have to add a 0, so we have 30%. All right, so our next problem, we have 15 out of 150 students that like country. So we're going to go ahead and simplify here by 15. So 15 divided by 15 is 1, and 150 divided by 15 is 10. So we have 1/10. And since we have 1/10, we have our place value, so we can just write 1/10. And we will move the decimal 2 times to the right, add a 0, and we have 10%. All right, and last we have 30 out of 150. Students said they like all types of music. So I'm going to simplify by 15. And 30 divided by 15 is 2. 150 divided by 15 is 10. I can simplify again by 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. So we have 1/5. Now earlier, when I was simplifying, I had 2/10, which is an equivalent fraction of 1/5. So 2/10, I can use that place value and write 2/10. And then I'll take the decimal and move it 2 times to the right, add a 0, and I have 20%. Now, since we surveyed all of the 150 people, all of my percents should add up to 100%. So let's make sure that's right. And if it is, that means we did everything correctly. So if I was to add all of these up, 0, 0, 0, 0 is 0. And 4 plus 3 is 7, plus 1 is 8, plus 2 would be 10, so we have 100%, so we did everything perfect. Alright, so we're trying to find either the percent, the part, or the whole for the next couple of problems. So I have 65 is what percent of 400? So I'm going to use my little Pokemon ball. Part over whole and percent. And remember, the part is the is, and the whole is the of. So I'm going to take my highlighter and I'm going to highlight what it is that I have. So I have 65 is. So I'm going to highlight my is. And of 400. So I'm going to highlight my of. So I know that I'm going to take the part, and this line right here means that I'm going to divide. Part divided by whole. So 65 divided by 400. So I'm going to use my ice cream method to help me divide. 65 divided by 400. So 400 doesn't go into 6 or 65, so I'm going to put zeros on top, add a decimal, bring it up, and add a 0. 400 goes into 650 one time. 1 times 400 is 400. When I subtract, I'll get 0 minus 0 is 0, 5 minus 0 is 5, and 6 minus 4 is 2. Add a 0, bring it down. 400 goes into 2,500 6 times. And 6 times 400 is 2,400. We'll subtract, and we'll get 100. Add a 0, bring it down. 400 goes into 1,000 2 times. 2 times 400 is 800. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up here so I have a little more room. So 1,000 minus 2 times 400 is 800. And we'll subtract, and we'll get 200. So I'm going to have to add another 0 and bring it down. And 400 goes into 2,000 5 times. 5 times 400 is 2,000. Subtract and get 0. Okay, so I have a decimal. But remember, we're wanting to find the percent here. So I'm going to move the decimal 2 times to the right, and I will have 16 and 25/100%. Okay, so for our next problem, we have what is 20% of 90. So I'm going to draw my little Pokemon ball, and I have part over whole and percent. So for this problem, we have 20%, so we know we have the percent, and of 90. And we know the of is the whole, so we have the whole. So this time, we're not using the division line, so we're going to multiply. So we're going to multiply 20% times 90. But remember, we have to first change the percent to a decimal. So move it 2 times to the left. So that will be 20/100 times 90. But we actually don't really need the 0 behind the 2. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that and just say 2/10 times 90. So when we multiply decimals, we can leave the decimal out. So let's just go ahead and do 90 times 2. So 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 9 is 18. Now we have to go back to our problem, and we notice that with 2/10, there's one number behind the decimal. 90 does not have a decimal, so there's no number behind that number. So altogether, there should be one number behind the decimal in our answer. So we have 18 as our final answer. One apple contains 80 calories. What percent of a 2,000 calorie diet is contained in one apple? Okay, so we know that one apple contains 80 calories. So that is part of all of the calories. And then we have 2,000 calories altogether for the calorie diet. So we have our part and our whole. Or you could say we have our is and our of. So if we look at our Pokemon ball, part over whole and percent, we know that we have the part and the whole. So we are going to be dividing. So 80 divided by 2,000. So I'm going to use my ice cream cone to help me. So 80 divided by 2,000. So 2,000 does not go into 8 or 80. So I'm going to add a decimal, bring it up, and then I'm going to add a 0. 2,000 does not go into 800, so I'm going to add another 0. 2,000 goes into 8,000 4 times. 4 times 2,000 is 8,000. Subtracting is 0. Well, right now we have a decimal, and remember we want a percent because it says what percent. So I'm going to move the decimal 2 times to the right. So my answer will be 4%. Alright, so now we have 33 is 30% of what number? So for this problem, I'm going to set up a proportion. So is, or my part, over of, or my whole, and then my percent out of 100. So I have 33 is, so 33 goes with my is. 30% goes with my 30%. So we're trying to find the whole here. Alright, so we can't go from 30 to 33, so we need to add another fraction, and we're going to go ahead and simplify or scale down. So let's divide by 10. So 30 divided by 10 is 3, and 100 divided by 10 is 10. And then I notice that 3 to 33, I can scale up by 11, so times 11. So we'll do the same thing to the bottom. So 10 times 11, which will be 110. So my answer, or my whole, is going to be 110. So next we have what is 150% of 44. So I'm going to use my little Pokemon ball for this one. So part over whole percent. So I have my percent, and I have of 44. And remember, of is the whole, so we also have the whole. So for this problem, we're going to multiply. So 150% times 44. Remember, first we have to change our percent to a decimal. So put your decimal at the end since there is no decimal. And we're going to move it 2 times to the left. So we have 1 5/10 times 44. Alright, so right now I'm going to just keep my decimal out, and I'm just going to do 44 times 15. So 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 4 is 20 plus 2 is 22. I'm going to add a placeholder. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 4 is 4. And let's add. So we get 0, 6, 6. Remember, we have one number behind the decimal, so one number behind the decimal. So our answer is going to be 66, which will be our part. A 1-year-old baby often weighs 400% of its birth weight. What should a 1-year-old baby weigh if it was 8 pounds at birth? So we know that 400% of birth weight. So 400% of the birth weight. Well, I know that my birth weight here is 8 pounds. So it's 400% of 8 pounds. So we have percent and of 8 pounds, which will be my whole. So part, whole, percent. So we have my percent and we have the of, which is our whole. So we are going to multiply. So 400% times 8. We have to first change the percent to a decimal. So add a decimal at the end since there is not one. Move it 2 times to the left. And we have 4 times 8. And 4 times 8 is 32, so 32 pounds. A survey of 250 people, so that's everybody, so that's our whole, showed that 200 people loved math, so that's our part. What percent of the people surveyed love math? All right, so we have our part and our whole. So we know for this problem we're going to divide. So my part is 220, my whole is 250, so we're going to divide here. So 220 divided by 250. 250 does not go into 2 or 22 or 220. So I'm going to add a decimal, bring it up, add a 0. 250 goes into 2,200 8 times. 8 times 250 is 2,000. We will subtract. So 0, 0, 2. Add a decimal or add a 0, bring it down. 250 goes into 2,000 8 times. 8 times 250 is 2,000. Subtracting is 0. So right now we have 88 hundredths, but we want it to be a percent. So remove the decimal 2 times to the right, and that gives us 88%. At the Liberty Tree Mall, 1,300 people took the Coke Pepsi Challenge. So that's all of the people, so that's our whole. 55% of those challenged preferred Coke. How many people selected Coke? So I'm going to set this up real quick. I know that I have the whole and the percent, so we're trying to find the part. So we are going to multiply. So 55% times 1,300. First we need to change 55% to a decimal, so move it 2 times to the left, giving us 55 hundredths times 1,300. So when I multiply, I'm just going to keep the decimal out for right now. So 1,300 times 55. So 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 3 is 15, and 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. I'm going to put a placeholder. 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 3 is 15, and 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. So let's add it up. We get 0, 0, 5, 11, and 7. But remember, we have to count the numbers behind the decimal. We have 2 here and 0 in the next number. So altogether, there should be 2 behind my decimal in my answer. So 715 people. 10 students are 6th graders in math counts. 20% of the students in math counts are 6th graders. How many total students are in math counts? So I'm going to set up a proportion here. Part over whole, or is over of, percent out of 100. Well, 10 of the students in math counts are 6th graders, so that's only part of the students. So 10 is our part. And we know that those 10 who are 6th graders represent 20%. So we're trying to find the whole. Well, we notice that 20 divided by 2 is 10, so 100 divided by 2 is 50. So there are 50 people in math counts.